Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we read Acts chapter number 27. Now in this chapter, it's going to feel like you're reading the diary of somebody who's just kind of keeping notes on a trip. And I guess partially that's true. This is documented. This is a trip. Now it's not a pleasure trip. Paul is under arrest. He is chained to Roman soldiers. He is going from port to port to port. And what you got here is a system where all of these merchant vessels of the ancient world were kind of under the responsibility, like as Rome kind of ruled the world, when their soldiers needed to go places, they would find ships that were going where they needed to go and they would just get on them. Now imagine this when you're reading so many different details of the story. Imagine going to the airport and going, okay, I've got to get from New Orleans to, and then name somewhere else. But in order to get that, you don't take the direct path because there's no direct flight. So instead what you do is you get on a flight here, you go to there, and you're just taking short hops all over the place.
He tried.
He did. Hey, just take that from me,
Good job.
guys. So you're taking short hops all over the place to eventually end up where you're going. So that's what you got here with the Apostle Paul. Now what's interesting about this is that when you read this story, although it is absolutely historically true, there's also this underlying kind of metaphor for life. Because, how often do we describe life as a journey or as a trip or as a process that unfolds? And so when we have Paul going on this trip and he's not just making some headway, then he's facing some storms, don't we too in our lives have moments where we have smooth sailing, tough sailing, shipwrecks, problems, good days, bright skies, and then pouring rain? That's kind of how life works. You'll also notice that in the story, Paul is always surrounded by people. Now, that seems like a kind of an innocuous detail, but it really is important. A friend and I were talking today about Paul and how whenever he writes, he's always writing in the company of other people. For instance, where he's writing a book of the Bible and he says Paul and Timothy, a servant of, he's with Timothy. Here he is with a bunch of other prisoners, one of them named Julius. So Paul, no matter where he goes, is always surrounded by other people. And Paul probably could have done a lot of wonderful things by himself. But the Christian life is never kind of a lone ranger kind of activity. Instead, it's a community sport. It's a team sport. And so you've got these guys, other prisoners, who, by the way, are probably already condemned. And Orville's having a great time with
He's
the
in another
children.
room, but he's at the door. If he can't be with us, he's going to be as close as
He's at the door.
trying to make the squeak.
I tried to take it from him.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Thank you, John. So,
Fun with the Duns.
Yeah, fun with the Duns. And so you have Paul with these people. These other prisoners have already been tried, already been convicted, and they're on their way. Unlike Paul, they're probably on their way to Rome to be executed. What a glorious grace of God that these guys travel with Paul over the long span of everything they go through. They see him and they hear him every day sharing the gospel. They're seeing him take control of these situations. They're on their way to die, and yet the Lord has just opened the door. He says, hey, by the way, before you go, I want you to hear the good news. And you're going to be locked on the boat with somebody telling you the good news every day. There's a grace that happens here. What'd you get out of it?
So as we read through this chapter, I cannot help. First of all, I love this chapter. It's pretty epic. But I cannot help but kind of just get a chuckle. Or, I don't know, I'm amused when it's like, okay, God says we're not going to wreck, but we do need to eat. We haven't eaten. We need to eat. And Paul takes the time to say the blessing, and he asks the Lord to, just an everyday mundane task, because for us, we have our prayer time and our personal prayer time, but a blessing is just a second acknowledgement of where our food came from, that we won't take it for granted. But I just think it's funny, just in this epic moment, I see the ship, I see Titanic, everyone's having a problem. Everyone's trying to get off and save themselves. And he's like, pause, let's say the blessing. But what I see here is such a cool picture of this fellowship that we have with God when we suffer. And I talked about it a few chapters back, that there's something sacred about suffering if we're doing it along with the Lord. And so when you should be panicking, or when you should be really worried or really scared or really like, I don't know, I would want to do some work to help the situation, he's pausing and he's saying the blessing, and he's making sure that as they are about to eat, that he acknowledges where their food came from. Another cool thing that I think is neat in this chapter is he's a prisoner, and his status of all of these people on the ship really should be like the bottom of the barrel. There are so many people who are above him, but when times get tough, and when you hit that moment where you're scared to death and you're at the bottom of your own life, you want the authority of Jesus' best friend. Like, you are going to find that person who is as close to God. You might not think they're cool to hang out with. You may think they're weird, but I promise when you are going through life's trials or troubles, that's probably who you're going to go to and share your prayer request with.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and so I love this cool picture of the upside down kingdom. I have shared recently on my girl channel, Overflow YouTube channel, what we've been through this summer, and maybe we should tell on here at some point, but there's just something special about going through hard times, difficult times, dark trials, clinging to the Lord and allowing him to lead you. There's a fellowship with him in that moment that you cannot have any other time. I'm just convinced of it.
So there's a guy named Joseph Parker, and I put this in my notes on this chapter in my Bible, and he saw what you saw, and he said, Paul began as a prisoner, but he ended as the captain of this ship. He took over the situation when it was obvious nobody else knew what to do. And then he talks about leadership. He says a crisis doesn't make a person. Instead, a crisis shows what a person is made of, and it tends to bring true leadership to the forefront. But you know what you're saying is people saw that that Paul walked with the Lord, and in moment of crisis, they looked to him because he was looking to the Lord. By the way, Luke wrote the book of Acts. And we're not certain if Luke was actually on this trip, or if Paul told him all about it as he recorded this, or if he talked with some of these sailors or other prisoners and just kind of made notes. What we do know is that Paul saying the blessing was noteworthy.
Yeah.
And, just kind of remind, people are always watching. And they're always looking for little markers of our testimony and our faith throughout the day, which is a reminder. Like when you go out to dinner, do you say the blessing when you go out to dinner? Now, we're not being legalistic about that, but I think it's biblical to say, to give thanks over our meal. But
for us, it's a marker, like when we back out of our driveway. For our family, that is a reminder. Hey, You're not living today for you, talk to God. And so every meal, that's another one of those markers in our daily life. Hey, don't forget.
That's right. And I think one of the added benefits of that is, what if you're in a situation where you're out to eat and you give thanks for your food, and it triggers this remembrance of God in somebody else? And so, be a
We've
witness.
even gotten our meals paid for because they like that we said the blessing. We're like, dear Lord, no.
Now we walk in every restaurant. We're like, all right, everyone, bow your heads. We don't really do
It just
that.
happened the one time.
It didn't. I don't remember where that
It was
happened.
like a fancy place.
Oh yeah.
I think in Alexandria, that area. Okay.
Yeah. Whoever that was great. I forgot
Thanks.
about that.
It's
Yeah.
treasure.
So always say the blessing. That's the obvious thing. Okay. We finish up the book of Acts next week on Monday. We'll see you on Sunday. Bye.
Bye. We're like pale.